everyone. As Liz said, my name is Mary Lukacek. I worked at state parks for 24 years on relicensing and water rights. And Liz asked me to introduce and facilitate this. Nice to see so many people here today who obviously have nothing better to do than work on FERC relicensing. Cheater glasses so I can read. This is a really amazing project. I had not, for some reason, gotten around to reading this FERC license until now. Believe that. And this Brin effort is just to get the ball rolling. There's a lot of amazing opportunities that are going to be part of this relicensing, and the only way those opportunities come to light is through participation and involvement by partners. So I don't know how much background any of you have. I'll just give you a little. On November 30th, the pre-application was released for this hydropower project, and Barber Dam got its first license in 1993 or 83, and it got a 40-year license, and so that will expire in let's see, November 30th of 2023. Today, we have two people who are going to be making presentation for you. Kevin Lewis with Idaho United and Marie Keller with Idaho Conservation League. Kevin has a remarkable amount of background working on FERC licensing and relicensing. He's executive director of IRU and has worked in hydropower relicensing for 25 years. He was a signatory through his paddling club to the Rock Creek Cresta settlement on the North Fork of the Feather River in California, and he has worked on dam relicensings on the Pitt, Kern, and Feather Rivers in California. And prior to joining IRU, Kevin served on the volunteer board for American Whitewater, and in that position he chaired the Conservation Committee, and he served as board president. And then during his time at IRU, Kevin has served as chair of the Northwest Caucus of the Hydropower Reform Coalition. He's also worked on a number of FERC projects in Idaho. Marie is the water associate at ICL and is the ICL lead on how water is used in Idaho and all things related to the flow of water in Idaho's lakes and rivers. She's in charge of ICL's work on issues related to water rights, dams, endangered fish, and more. She holds a Juris Doctorate from U of I and has a focus in water policy. Prior to joining ICL, she held clerkships at Idaho's 4th District Court and Idaho's U.S. District Court. And before entering law school, she was a commercial river guide in Tennessee, Colorado, and Alaska. So this is an opportunity to get on board. There's a lot of really interesting parts to this project. The history of it, 1904, Barber Lumber Company operated a sawmill there. They pushed up the dam, they produced power there. After they went away, Pullman Brick had a facility there, which is now the site of the Idaho Department of Parks and Recreation. Idaho Shakespeare is on the Barber Pools nature area, and the Foundation for Parks and Lands manages that. The project itself, when I was reading the FERC license, a wood crib dam, rock filled with a concrete cap. Very exciting. Without further ado, Kevin Lewis.
Thanks, everybody. See if we can make a often complex subject simple. And my part today is really to talk about the public participation in hydropower licensing. I think a disclaimer is I'm not advocating for anything on Barber Dam at this point because I haven't even read the pre-application notice yet. So I'm just going to talk about public participation, how it works, how it can work, and what can be achieved through it. And like a number of you, 25 years ago, I was just a private citizen. I was an avid voter, and I got sucked into a hydropower project as a volunteer, and that kind of started my career, so to speak. So, and I promise that there's only 2 slides I have with actual words on the screen. Everything else is photographs, because I don't like doing slides with words. So I think we have to go back to just after in the beginning with this process. So way back in 1978, Congress passed a bill called, we just call it PURPA. And the purpose of that bill, so prior to then, hydropower was pretty much the sandbox of large utilities. That's who built hydropower, that's who operated hydropower. There were a few people here and there in the backwoods that had a little tiny hose running down the hillside from their stream, and this little Pelton wheel, and an alternator from a car, and a bank of batteries. That's how they lit their cabin. But primarily, hydropower was really the purview of big utilities. Back in the late 70s, there was a movement towards smaller hydropower development, and so PURPA was a law that was passed to promote the increase of smaller hydropower projects. Most hydropower projects are 10, 20, 30, 1,000 megawatts. They're pretty large in size. PURPA applied to potential projects up to 5 megawatts in size. They were a lot smaller. That set off a craze of small hydro development on small streams throughout, especially throughout the West. Like Mary said, Barber Dam was licensed in '83. That's a PURPA project. There was good and bad to that, because a lot of streams were being diverted into tubes and run through hydro plants and basically dewatering a lot of streams, and that certainly had environmental impacts. So in '86, they passed ECPA. If you're going to be involved in hydropower, get used to acronyms. They're your life. So ECPA tried to put some sideboards on this, and one of the things that ECPA said was that non-power uses should be given equal consideration to power uses. It didn't say equal treatment; it just said equal consideration. But that was a big deal, and ECPA really attempted to put some sideboards on what was then at that time kind of a rampant development of small hydro projects. That's kind of what got me interested way back in those days. I saw these projects being built on streams that I paddled all the time. So we were losing resources, and we really didn't have a way to fight this. What also occurred back then in the late 70s, early 80s was a few recreation environmental groups realized they could actually use the licensing process to try and get back some benefits. Restore some stream flows on previously dewatered streams, improve habitat. So you could actually gain some environmental benefits and recreational benefits by being involved in the process. And really the ringleader for that was a group called American Whitewater, which is a national recreation-based nonprofit, but their mission is to protect and restore rivers. I belonged to American Whitewater way back in the 1960s, so I kind of tracked this in their journal through the early years. I'm going, man, that's really cool stuff. I wish I was as smart as those guys. Unfortunately, I got sucked into it later on. So AW and a number of other organizations got together and started intervening in license applications, intervening in new project proposals, and they learned their way through a number of years, and in the end, they achieved a lot of positive benefits over the last 25 years of relicensing. Licensing kind of occurs in this country in groups. So the first block was what we call the 1980s in the northeast part of the country. So there were a lot of folks got involved up there, the Kennebec River and a bunch of smaller rivers. And then the licensing moved down the eastern seaboard, then it jumped to the west coast. In California, we had a bunch of stuff going on in the 90s and 2000s. There's still some stuff going on now. Then it kind of moved up to the Pacific Northwest. And lo and behold, the stuff in New England is getting ready to come back up for relicensing again. So if you like the first horse race, welcome to the second horse race. So really, that's when the public started getting involved is in the 70s and early 80s, and it's grown since then. So I was going to talk about a couple different rivers. Mary mentioned the North Fork of the Feather. This is what the North Fork of the Feather looked like when I got involved in the 1990s. It was stair-step hydropowered. The entire flow was diverted through a tunnel. So the dam was diverted through a tunnel. 6 or 8 miles downstream, it dropped down in a penstock to a powerhouse, then go right back into a reservoir and back into a tunnel. So the bypass reaches were basically dry. The FERC license for this project said the minimum in-stream flow on this stretch of river was 0. Basically, they figured leakage from the dam would take care of everything. The only time this section of river ever saw water was during spring runoff, during a flood event. Then it would go from 0 to sometimes almost 100,000 cubic feet per second, and then back down to 0 again. The other side note is about 8 miles downstream from this photo, where I took this photograph, is where the recent campfire started, the one that burned Paradise up in northern California. The main power line leaving this canyon from all these hydro projects was the power line that arced and started that fire. So it started just downstream from here. So myself and a few other folks, I represented the paddling club, Shasta Paddlers. Another friend of mine, now longtime friend of mine, Dave Steindorf, was representing Chico Paddleheads, and then American Whitewater had a representative. So we basically joined into this licensing process. It had already been 17 years on annual licenses at that time. They'd been at a stalemate. And we jumped into this, and I actually forget how many years it took us to reach a settlement, but we ultimately reached a settlement with the utility, Pacific Gas and Electric, the largest utility in California, and a very difficult utility to deal with. But we did finally reach a settlement agreement, and once it had been dry, ended up being, now the in-stream flow is just short of 500 cubic feet per second. In the summertime, we get a weekend of whitewater releases on 2 different sections of the river. This was the first year we were bringing 400 or 500 people would arrive a day for these 2-day weekends. We actually had to lease a bus from the county to haul people from the takeout to the put in. So immediate skyrocketed use. People just didn't get to book this before because it was either dry or it was a massive flood. It was basically a death trap. And the use stays the same today. So we did the settlement. I think we signed the settlement in 2002. It's a 40-year deal. So this settlement agreement will probably extend past my lifetime. But that's the kind of thing you can achieve through public participation. Something a little closer to home. This is over on the Sandy River. Sandy River flows into the Columbia Gorge, lower into the Columbia Gorge. It was a small hydropower project, going through relicensing, 100-year-old dam, complete barrier to migratory fish. During the relicensing process, the utility came to the conclusion that it wasn't worth building fish ladders and doing things they needed to do to meet modern environmental law. And so they decided, well, it's got to go. Blew it up, flushed water down it. The week after the dam was gone, salmon were swimming upstream, and salmon and steelhead are still, flourishing in that section of the river that was basically blocked for fish passage for 100 years. I think other projects I mentioned are the Condit Dam, which is on the White Salmon, which is the Washington side of Hood River, the Columbia Gorge. It was about 110 foot hydropower dam. No fish passage at all, small hydro project. It was in relicensing, the same thing. The utility realized, it was Pacificor, realized that it wasn't worth adding fish ladders and everything else for the power that it generated. So that dam was a concrete gravity dam. They tunneled into the backside of it about 10 feet short of the face. They packed it full of explosives, and on one special day, they just blew a hole in the dam, drained the entire reservoir through this hole in 45 minutes. And a week later, there's salmon swimming up through the hole in the dam. They removed the dam, site's restored, salmon are coming back. It works. Once again, I'm not advocating this for anything. I'm just trying to show an example of what can be accomplished through involvement. Closer to home, this is the Cove Dam on the Bear River. So the Bear River was relicensed through a collaborative process that IRU was one of the signatories to that. Liz worked on that. It was before my time here, 2002, 2000.
I started on that in about 85.
Yeah.
John worked on it.
I actually tracked the project when I lived in California. I knew what was going on in the Bear River because it was a hydro project. But led to a settlement agreement. A lot of good. I mean, the utility is spending millions of dollars doing habitat restoration. But as part of that settlement agreement, a couple years later, the utility realized that the Cove Dam, which was part of this project, it was a very old dam. The flowway it used to move water down to the hydro plant was a wooden flume, and the flume was rotted. They needed to replace this entire flume. And the same thing, they realized that this dam did not produce enough power to warrant the cost to replace this flume. So they came back to the settlement group and said, if you'll give us a few CFS back, we'll remove this dam. Today, that's what the site looks like. And so, a small dam. The other thing I think that I do want to talk about is that relicensing can be a contentious process. Hopefully, through the process, you end up building relationships, and utility generally comes around. At first, they're resistant because they have it all and they don't want to give anything up, and we want a piece of that action, basically. But you can build good relationships, and this was a Pacific Core dam also. We've become great partners with Pacific Core, and in 2003, I think, an irrigation district over in the Bear River filed an application to build a new dam on the Bear. This dam would have been directly below that project that was just relicensed. It would have dammed the Narrows, the Bear River Narrows. The foreground would have been a giant reservoir, stagnant reservoir. We found ourselves in an interesting position of being partnered with the utility that we had settled with in fighting this proposed dam. Peter Anderson back in the back there has got some credit for this too. So it took 10 years, Peter, 12 years, I don't know, 10, 12 years, but we ultimately, we being conservation groups, local citizens, but in the end, FERC denied the application to build this dam.
There were two proposals for that particular project.
One about 30 years or 25 years ago.
About 20 years apart.
That was defeated as well. And ultimately, we fought the water right. We actually blocked the water right for this project. They still tried to go forward with the dam. But ultimately, FERC said, no, it's not in the public interest. So that's what could be accomplished through public participation. I think the only other points I put out is that citizen involvement is important. The FERC process is complicated, but it's doable. If I can figure it out, you can figure it out. I think what a lot of us bring to the table is we know the process. We've been involved in it for a long time. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that and let Marie jump up and talk a little more focused on current stuff.
One thing I would share is I know that I began my job with the Idaho Conservation League in January of 2012, and one of the things I remember, I met Kevin and Liz and Peter all at that time, but I remember talking to Peter, trying to get a deeper understanding of some of the nuances of water law and policy, and he's like, we can meet right now. I'm really working a lot on this Bear River water right contested case and the whole process over there. And so I can remember, that was the spring of 2012. when that
Time
was going
flies
on.
when you're having
But
fun.
yeah, time does fly. I can't believe I've been with ICL 7 years now. That's amazing. Again, I'm Marie Kellner, and I'm the Water Associate. That's my job title at the Idaho Conservation League. And I work on water issues from the perspective of how we use water quantity, basically, more than quality, though I do a bit of that. And I want to thank Liz, who is a mentor to me, and who invited me to be here today, and Bryn. And I just want to give a shout out to Bryn also, because we, especially as we have an opportunity like the relicensing of the Barber Dam, I think this community is really fortunate that Bryn formed when it did and has been doing the work it's been doing for the last many years, because it's really setting the whole community up well to have already identified needs in the Boise system and opportunities in the Boise system, and this might be an opportunity to bring a lot of things together to make good things happen, hopefully, for the river. And I also want to, much like Kevin, ICL doesn't have like a firm stance on what it thinks should happen in relation to this relicensing. This is a process, and the idea behind it is that it starts now so that there's enough time for the whole community and everyone who has an opinion or has something at stake has the opportunity to engage and to learn and to develop it as it goes. That's the idea behind the relicensing process, or it's part of the idea behind the relicensing process. As others have said, the Barber Dam, the current permit was issued in 1983, and it's a 40-year permit, and it expires in 2023. So it's 2018, it's 5 years prior to that, and Enel Green Power, the company that operates the dam, has given notice just in the last couple of weeks that it officially intends to or hopes to relicense, to get a new license. And so that's part of why this is all happening now. This is the beginning of a 5-year process. So one of the things I've learned from folks that have done a lot of this, a lot more than I have, is it's a long game. And so ideally, if you are, if you care a lot, if you have things that you want to make sure are heard in this process, ideally you can commit to be a part of it for several years, because it takes years. Just have a few photos. This is the Barber Dam. How many people have seen the Barber Dam or been to the Barber Dam? Okay, a lot of us, but not everyone, and that doesn't surprise me. Now, I'm not a Boise native. I didn't grow up here. I've been here about 8 years right now, but I had actually not visited the Barber Dam until a few years ago, when there was a malfunction at the dam and it accidentally dried up the river overnight. And that put it on my radar through my work with ICL. And then I've since learned a lot more about the whole area and what an amazing resource the pool behind it is, and the wildlife management area, and the fact that we have this reserve essentially in the middle of the city and just massive development that's happening. So it's a really neat thing to see there. So this is from the early 20th century. The dam was built, I think it was finished in 1906. It predates the big dams on the Boise. It predates Arrow Rock, which was built in the teens, and then Lucky Peak and Anderson Ranch were built mid 20th century. So this is way back. There was the diversion dam that feeds into the New York Canal, and this, I mean, there were other diversion dams, smaller dams on the river, but this predates all the big dams higher up on the system. And it was built, as has been said, to be part of a mill process, timber process. So the logs would be floated down to this area. The dam was built, created a mill behind it. And it's my understanding that the community was called Barberton, and there was a little town there. And of course, if we can try to imagine what it was like 100 years ago here, a lot fewer people. And that was way out in the country from downtown Boise. So it was its own community. And the mill operated till the 30s. I don't know for sure, but I would imagine the Depression had something to do with it, and then also just other changes in society. And in the mid-30s, the mill closed down. The town wrapped up soon after that. And then through much of the 20th century, it kind of bounced around between hands. And then in the 70s, Ada County took possession of the dam through a tax default. Basically, the taxes weren't paid on it for a period of time, and the county assumed possession of it. And in 1978, it was placed on the National Historic Register. And then in 1983, Enel got a license to generate hydropower there. There was always some hydropower component of it while it was functioning. That was the idea. Not only did it create the pond to capture the wood, but also it was generating some hydro to power the mill that milled the wood. So there always was a hydro component. And then in the 80s, Enel Green Power, and I don't know if it's always been that. It's also Fulcrum is another name of the business that owns it, the corporation. But they've had that license now again for about 35 years. It generates in the neighborhood of 4 megawatts. It's my understanding it's a little less than that. But and it sells the power to Idaho Power. That's where this is going. So again, we have this opportunity right now because this, while this is generating power, and let me move it forward because we have a slightly more modern photo. Here's a slightly more modern photo. While it's out there, it's generating power. That is a public good. We need power. Hydropower is, there are a lot of pros to hydropower. There's some cons to hydropower, but it is out there, it is generating something, and so that's deemed a public good. And that is part of why an entity, we all need power, I guess is what I'm getting at. And so this is a way to generate power. But we do have the Federal Power Act that regulates non-governmental power entities to try to balance a lot of different values and a lot of different priorities. And so, in this instance, we have a dam. The dam's about 20 feet, give or take. Someone may actually know the actual dimensions, and I apologize that I don't, but I believe it's just a little over 20 feet tall. It's about 400 feet wide. It dams the whole river. There's not fish passage around it. It has, over the last century, created this really pretty amazing wildlife refuge behind it. That property is held by the Idaho Foundation for Parks and Land, or it's under conservation easement with that organization, which is a land trust. And it's about 700 acres, and it's managed not really for all of us to go and recreate in and be in. It's really managed to be a wild space, to be open space. You can boat through. How many? I know Bren has organized floats through it. How many people? Anybody canoed out there, floated down from the 21 bridge? I've done it, just done it once, but really neat to come through. You can boat through. But the idea is not necessarily that this is more recreational space behind it for this growing community, but that we maintain wild open space for the animals that need it and for water quality purposes. It's overwintering habitat for deer. It provides really important habitat for migratory birds, bald eagles, osprey, and other birds that are passing through. And if you really try to visualize the whole community, I mean, it's 700 acres amidst a lot of development. It's a really important area for these species. But then also, it's a complete obstruction to anything going up and down the river, right? And we know that fishing is a tremendous activity along the Boise River. Fish habitat is an important thing. Water quality is an important thing. And these are things that have to be balanced in the face of renewing this license. Something that I think is important to remember about the FERC process and license and other kinds of regulations in general, it's not a permanent license, right? It was issued in 1983. We had the opportunity to renew it. Part of the reason that licenses and other permits are not permanent is because things change over time. And we need the opportunity to go back and revisit what's happening to make sure that the way something's being managed is still in keeping with our values as a community, and that it protects things, that protects as well as offers things that are important for the community. And that's what is happening right now with this, and it's just beginning. And again, that's one of the reasons I really appreciate Bryn organizing this today as sort of a kickoff for some of us that are concerned. I would imagine everybody in the room is interested in this, and perhaps is interested in being engaged in it. And as Kevin said, one of the things about this process is it's intended to involve engagement. It is an opportunity for people in the public, for interested individuals, interested organizations, interested, homeowners associations, paddling groups, angling groups, folks concerned about the river generally, the communities that are all up and down the river, everyone that, it's a public resource. The river is a public resource, and this business has a license to use that public resource to generate power and earn a profit. But the FERC license that they will receive, that they have received and hope to receive in the future, is not just about generating the maximum profit for the business. It's about a business that is interested in earning a profit, but also providing this thing that we all need, power, but balanced with all the other considerations that this public resource deserves. And that's what we have the opportunity, or how ICL sees the opportunity in the next several years to engage and be an advocate for some of the in-stream values of rivers and water that maybe weren't considered in 1983. The community has certainly exploded since then. I know many people in the room were here then, grew up here, and have lived here for decades. I, of course, was not here in 1983, but I do know how much it's grown since that time. It's a different valley. It's a different community. There are more stresses on the river. The uses of the river are very different than they were in 1983. And so this is an opportunity to revisit that and look at how this is operated in the face of other interests in the river and increasing stresses on the river. Here's this one. Now, one of the things, this is a photo, I don't know how many people have seen this. This was something that Frankie Barnhill with Public Radio put together several years ago. And I'm not sure if everybody knows, but the Boise State Public Radio offices, the studio, is along the Greenbelt, kind of as you're headed out in southeast Boise. And so I believe this Frankie Barnhill, who's a reporter, got to work one morning, and she looked out and she saw the image that's on the right there. Left to my right. The left. I'm like, my right.
You're the right.
Yeah, okay. There. I'm teaching my 5-year-old, like, the L means left. Okay. So on the left, she looked out, and she apparently, talked with her about it. She looked out and said, "There's no water in the river. That's odd." And then this was 3 hours later when there was water in the river. But what had happened was it was a whole sort of cascade of unfortunate events that led to the river around 11 at night. The dam stopped allowing water to flow through because there was construction being done on it. The pool was far lower than normal, so it didn't start overflowing as soon as it might have otherwise. And basically it dried the river for about 8 hours. And then this was several hours. And then the manager got to work the next morning to discover there was no water flowing over the dam. So to, I think, his great distress, and immediately put things into effect to get water moving again, which it did. This is the kind of thing, it happens. It wasn't purposeful, it wasn't negligent, it happens. But these are the kind of things that we have to think about. How can we make sure that never happens again? Because what that means is that, you know, fish need water in the most basic of ways. While there was not a documented major fish kill, we all know fish need water. Fish died because of this. Perhaps whole class years of fish died because of this. It was an accident, but there are things that can be done to make sure it doesn't happen again, or that we have more safeguards in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. This is an opportunity to make sure those kinds of things happen and are factored into this process. That's really just one example, though. I mean, this was a really egregious example, but it's a reminder of why it's important, if you care about things like the habitat that the river provides, that you're a part of a process like this, and that you get in and make sure that your concerns be heard. And again, it's an opportunity to make that happen. And it's the reason that it's such a long process is so that there's time to do the kind of studies and analysis and have the kind of conversations to make sure all these things are taken into account as we move forward in this process. So there's a variety of things that could come out of this as what's called environmental mitigation in this process. Let me take a sip here. Mitigation is the idea that we lessen certain impacts. We make things less severe than they might be otherwise. The FERC process, the Federal Power Act, prescribes that environmental mitigation is part of this process. It's acknowledged like this is the use of a resource, a public resource. There are bound to be environmental impacts, negative environmental impacts, because it is putting an obstruction in the middle of a flowing river. I mean, there are impacts to that. And so what we have the opportunity to do now is talk about what are some things that could be done in this relicensing that will help to lessen the fact that fish can't get around this dam right now, or that this kind of thing might happen from time to time, or that the pool behind the dam needs a certain amount of flow, and we don't necessarily know how much flow is going to be available any given year, especially with a changing climate. And so how could this be operated in a way that makes sure water is still continuing to flow through for all the water quality benefits that provides and are required by all the cities all the way down the system that have discharge permits into the river. Those are all things that are considered right now, and this is an opportunity to consider those. And they are, it's, you know, I stand here, I am an environmental advocate professionally, I mean, that's my job, but I'm not standing here saying that just because I'm an environmental advocate. This is contemplated in the Federal Power Act. It's expected that it be a part of this process. And so it should be considered, even if a thing like ICL or IRU or BREN didn't exist, it should still be analyzed, contemplated, and acted on by a process like this. I think we're fortunate in this community that those organizations I just named do exist, and Trout Unlimited is also represented in the room, and I'm sure others as well, that all have a vested interest in this, a valid interest in this, and this is an opportunity for us all to engage. There are different ways to engage, and actually Kevin would be more of an expert on that than I am, and so if we get some questions, I'll defer to him on that. But excuse me, one of the things that can be done is you as an individual, or you with the municipality you represent, or the organization you represent, or the business you represent, can file to intervene in this process. Intervention, I say this as an attorney, I know that a lot of legal processes seem very intimidating and a little bit scary, and it feels like, oh my gosh, what does this mean if I intervene? What is this going to mean for me? In this instance, intervention is actually it doesn't mean that you oppose it or support it. It can also just be a way of saying, I'm very interested in this. I want to be kept abreast of what's happening. I want to get the email notice when there's a new filing in this, and it makes you essentially a party to the relicensing, and you get all the information as it is provided, as opposed to going in always and checking the FERC website to see what's happened lately. So being an intervener, you would be an intervener if you move to intervene, is an opportunity that everyone has. And as I've heard people describe it, one of the only downsides to becoming an intervener is that you will be exposed to voluminous information that you may not be interested in. But you don't have to read it, you know, if it's something that you don't care about. But it is a great way to be aware of what's happening. It's open to, again, anyone and everyone. And it doesn't mean that you are taking a stance. It means that you are interested and you are expressing your interest. And all of us as citizens have the opportunity to do that. The Federal Power Act, which governs this, contemplates that. It expects that, and it has a provision that allows it. And so just remember that. That's something that you can do. You can also, you don't have to officially become, or excuse me, one other thing about being an intervener is it does give you legal standing. It makes you a party to the relicensing in the way that you might be the party to a lawsuit in other legal settings. And that, if you are concerned about it, if you're concerned that it's going to be granted in a way that you're not comfortable with, or if you're concerned from any perspective, it would set you up better to have legal footing to be a part of raising those concerns after the license is issued or as it's about to be issued. So if you think that you are interested to that point, it's a good thing to do. You also, though, can just say that you're an interested party. You can let FERC know, or you can let Enel know, or Ada County know. The Ada County, again, is the owner. Enel Green Power is the operator. They're the ones jointly applying to relicense this. So you also can let them know and get on their notice list. ICL is on the notice list, and I've already received several things from the facilitator of this process on behalf of Enel. I'm sure other people in the room have too that are working on behalf of different organizations, and maybe some individuals as well. I just this morning was looking at the notice list already, and it's longer than the service list of entities and people interested is longer than the notice of intent that they want to renew the application. So I underscore all that because I think it's really important to remember that all of us, any concern that you have related to the use of this public resource is a valid concern, and it's something that this is a forum for it to be heard, and it should be meaningfully heard. And I think it's really important that people and municipalities and entities take advantage of that, because it is a reminder to the folks in the position of making decisions that this is a public resource that a lot of people have vested interest in. And I think that's really important. And if we don't exercise that ability and right that we have, it's easy for it to be overlooked. And not necessarily in a vindictive way. It just can be overlooked. But it's real, it's valid, and you all have it. I have it in my work capacity and my personal capacity too. I'm trying to think of
Talk about a few of the next steps.
a few of the next steps. So yeah. So actually, one of the things I brought today, I have 20 copies of it, and I'll have it back there on the table. This is Enel Green Power's notice of intent to relicense the dam. They would like to have the ability to generate power there again for the next 30 to 50 years, however many it'll be. So I brought just copies for people. There are a handful of things that I thought would be helpful for people. One is there's a FERC project number. That's a really important number to know. It's assigned to this. All the documentation that is related to this relicensing is housed on the FERC website, and this is how you would search for it and find it. If you wanted to intervene, this is how you would do that with that number. The timeline of things that are happening, the Enel Green Power is applied to do what's called the typical licensing application. So it's sort of the standard for the original way that these projects could be licensed. They have, I believe it is 30 days, I think it's the end of December, for FERC to respond and let them know that, yes, you can or cannot proceed through the TLA, the typical licensing application. And so if someone had a concern about that being the process that's being used, you would need to let FERC know by the end of this month. Otherwise, the time is run to be able to let them know if you have concerns about that process. Then after that, depending on the outcome, if FERC says, yeah, we'll go through this sort of the standard process for doing this, then we start to move forward where there will begin to be public meetings, public opportunities. Enel and Ada County will be expected to host public meetings and opportunities to inform the public of what's being proposed and let the public know when they have opportunities to engage. That all is anticipated to happen in the first part of 2019, at least if things move forward as they are right now. As soon as March, I believe, by the end of March, actually, there should be meetings happening that are kicking off this process. If you wanted to intervene, you can do that at any time. You can make a motion to intervene at any time. One of the resources that I have found and is helpful for me, and Kevin referenced it, or at least was referenced in his biography. He sits on this board, but the Hydropower Reform Coalition, their website is hydroreform.org. Hydroreform.org. That website has a tremendous amount of information on how to engage in this process. If you're interested in engaging in the process, or if your organization is interested in engaging in that process and you don't have that expertise, I highly recommend it. There are numerous guides on it, how as a citizen to engage in the process. And it's very helpful. So I highly recommend it again, hydroreform.org. There are a variety of different documents on there that can help answer a lot of questions and also guide you through the process. Being somebody who's not done a tremendous amount of these, I'm using it to help me. It has, FERC's website also is very important. There's voluminous information, I would say again, and a lot of it's it's legal. It's legalese, you would say. It's federal statutes and policies and rules, and the Hydropower Reform site just is a little more, it's written for a layman, and so I think it's a little easier to understand. I say that as a lawyer. It's easier to understand. And it distills some of the timelines. I mean, again, you don't even have to want to see the dam come out to take benefit from the Hydropower Reform website. It provides timelines, it provides tables of what happens, it provides information on how to engage. And I highly recommend it as a place to go. FERC's website, of course, is also very important. That is the federal entity that is tasked with this relicensing. And it has a tremendous amount of information, very technical. So if that's not your thing, then you want to step away from that. But that's what's coming up next. It's really kicking off now. On November 30th, when Enel Green Power filed this notice of intent, that was we're in it, we're moving forward. So that was just, 2 weeks ago. So it's just begun. So I'll stop right there and let others.
All right, well, we were going to have allow people to ask questions, so if Kevin wants to come back up, maybe all three of us will just stay up front.
Sure.
And John.
Yeah, I probably spent 40% of my 33-year career with the Fish and Game Department going through